What's up, guys? Welcome to the Week 1 breakdown of the Initial Championship League. My name is Bill Jump Carter, and I am the lead colorcaster for the ICL broadcast. This is a new thing that I'm going to try to do once a week before every scheduled broadcast. I'm going to kind of go through the two best-of-3 sets that we have, give you a little bit of insight on what I think both of these teams bring to the table, give you my predictions, just continuously break down kind of what we can see from these teams moving forward, and more importantly, how they're going to do on the week's broadcast. So to give you a little bit of insight on the teams that we have playing today on Monday, July 18th for Week 1, it's going to be Sain eSports taking on Don't Queue Up tomorrow. Now, that's going to be our first set, and I kind of want to go through the rosters for you. So for Sain eSports, we have CC Win in the top lane, Major Danger in the jungle, Selend in the mid lane, Prototype at AD carry, and Call Me Wyan at support. Now, for Sain eSports, I've got a couple notes, so if I'm going back and forth, then that's kind of the reason I'm doing that, is for Sain eSports, you have a couple things that they have going for them. Obviously, they have an established organization. Sain has been, as an organization, has been around for a while. They've found success with their roster. They actually just won the Serpentis Pro League, taking home the big chunk of that $1,500 prize pool just last month. And that's kind of the biggest thing that they bring to the table for me. Having an identical roster is extremely pivotal moving forward. You think of teams such as Cloud9 when they first came into the scene, and just their ability to succeed because of the stable roster that they had. Well, coming into the ICL, that's exactly what Sain is able to bring to the table right off the bat. Same exact 5 starting roster. They performed amicably. They took down Zenith Esports in 5 games in the finals of the Serpentis Pro League. But more importantly, it's their ability to adapt. If you take a look back at those games, some of the other games in the later half of the season, you can see that Sain really has this ability to be consistent as a unit. But more importantly, it's that consistency in the mid lane that brings them a lot of strength. You look at a lot of these semi-professional teams and kind of what differentiates the goods from the greats, and to me, a big piece of that is their ability to perform effectively in the mid game. Anybody can play aggressive in the early game, anybody can play safe in the early game, and the late game team fights is something that's kind of a wash up. But for me, it's your ability in that middle section of the game to have those rotations, to have those vision placements, and that's something that I definitely think Sain brings to the table, along with the experience that they have in that roster that carried them throughout the latter half of the Serpentis Pro League season. Another couple things that they are definitely good at, CC Win as a top laner is an extremely support style top, and I don't mean support style in the champions that he plays. He's definitely known to bring out some of those carry top laners. We've seen him on Gnar, we've seen him on Aurelia, various others, but when I say he's a very support style top laner, he's extremely proactive in the teleports that he makes. If you go back and you look at his gameplay, a lot of his early game rotations and his early game teleport rotations and late game cross map pressure with the teleport spell available is, to me, unbelievable. And so that is going to be something that really helps them in their game against Don't Queue Up tomorrow, if he's going to be able to show up on that sense. Another laner that I kind of want to talk about, well, not necessarily a laner, the jungler, Major Danger. This is the double-edged sword for Sain eSports, in my opinion. You have Major Danger, who is an extremely early-game aggressive jungler. He knows how to get his team ahead, and that's fantastic, but his team revolves around that being a success. If you take a look at the games that they lost, it's when Major Danger essentially didn't show up, and when he didn't have any impact in the early game. They are heavily reliant on that, and even though Sain has a very solid roster, Selene being able to hold himself, CC Win we've already talked about, a lot of their team revolves around those grouped decisions, and those grouped decisions can't happen unless Major Danger puts his team in a good spot. Another strength that I believe they have is in Wyan. Wyan's rotations, especially in the 2v1 situation, is definitely something to look highly upon. He is just phenomenal at moving around, getting the early vision control, and kind of plays that support style to not necessarily his AD carry in the early game, but more importantly, Major Danger. Because he's showing pressure around the map, it forces a distraction to the enemy team, and that allows Major Danger a little bit more flexibility to invade into the jungle, try to get some knowledge on the enemy jungler, and so on and so forth. And then finally, the biggest strength that I see for Sain eSports is the solid base warding that they have. There are definitely tiers in the amount of vision control that you have as a team, but something that I believe Sain eSports definitely has is a very solid bottom threshold of warding that they have. They ward the outer limits very well. Once they get the inner ring of turrets, they're fairly decent at coming in and getting a little bit more of the decent wards. And this is a great segue. I wanted to say this last because, yes, they have a great bottom threshold, but I think that the fact that their bottom threshold is where it's at, that could be something that could be exploited. Moving on now to the weaknesses on that, I think that their early game and mid game warding is great. Like I mentioned, that base warding system. Once they get the inner ring, or the outer ring, it's fantastic. But the late game vision control is what's lacking, in my opinion. I think that when they're ahead and things are going their way, 5, 6, 7,000 gold in the lead, things are great, things are dandy. But when they're even, I almost feel like they're scared to go into the jungle, because you look at some of the warding that they have, and it kind of, to me, seems that they are, just hoping that the enemy team pops up exactly where they want. So that's kind of a big issue for me that I see that could be exploited. Again, the double-edged sword with Major Danger. I think that the early game is too reliant on him. I think that I would like to see the other laners step up and kind of see what they can kind of bring to the table in the lane phase. The mid game, like we mentioned, is solid, but that mid game shot calling and that mid gaming prowess that I mentioned earlier needs to transition to the late game, because while they have a very conjoined sense of players and a lot of experience playing together, that identical roster, they don't have this just extreme high level of mechanical skill that you see a team such as Don't Queue Up Tomorrow, which we'll cover in a second, really has to offer. And so I want to see them be able to kind of transgress and transcend the early game or the mid game decision making that they have, and kind of push it to the next level with the late game. The other thing is they don't play well when they're behind. They're great when they're ahead. They're decent when they're even, but when they're behind, they really seem to struggle because, and this kind of goes back to my other point of that late game vision control, they kind of struggle on that sense. And so I'd really like to see, what they can do and really how they can kind of change things up with that, with the fact of them playing behind. Because with this being a 3-game series against Don't Queue Up Tomorrow, I really do think there is going to come a point. Don't know when, don't know where, but there's going to come a point where I think they're going to get behind. And I really want to see how they operate and how they kind of change their mentality to kind of push themselves forward. Finally, the 2v1 strats. They are extremely reactive to the 2v1. They go into the 2v1 if they feel like they have to, but then it's a very standard 2v1. They don't necessarily have the most aggressive 2v1 strategy. It's a very standard 2v1. You don't get crazy dives. You don't get crazy invades. It's just, we're going to run a 2v1. We're going to get the tower. We're going to rotate, and then we're just going to sit and farm and see what happens. So I would like to see them kind of change up their 2v1 strategy and add a little bit more variety to their setup. Now we have Don't Queue Up Tomorrow. Flipping through their roster, you've got Licorice in the top lane, Nintendo Dex in the jungle, Damonte in the mid lane, Deathlead AD carry, and Low Pally at support. I mean, just looking at that roster, you know that there's a high mechanical skill involved. Almost all of these players have NACS experience. Licorice played for Cloud9 Challenger. You've had Damonte that's bounced from team to team. Nintendo Dex, one of the OGs of the professional scene. So they've been around for a while. They have that experience, and more importantly, they have what I like to call the carry factor. You look at Licorice, you look at the other teams that he's played on and kind of what has created his sense of fame, and it's his ability to carry from the top lane, dominate his lane, and allow that to bleed into other lanes. So he's definitely someone that I look out for. Another one that I want to see is Damonte. Damonte on Assassin's LeBlanc, one of his, one of his best champions. Definitely something he can perform well on. And so I am really excited to see how they're going to perform and how they're going to use that experience factor in the NACS as well as that mechanical skill in the early game, because that's what I see them succeeding at the most. The easiest parallel I can draw is Frostbite. Frostbite Gaming was a team that was commissioned by Voyboy back in the HTC Ascension days. They made a run at the NACS, and it's just a phenomenal sense of players. But that's kind of that was what they had. They had an aggressive early game, and they had really powerful lanes. But if they weren't able to make it past that, then that's when the difficult things started to happen. So that's what I see as the biggest strength, is that early game prowess. Specifically in the 2v1 situation, Sain, to their, I would say, dismay, have a very standard, very passive 2v1 situation. The 2v1 coming out of Don't Queue Up Tomorrow is extremely aggressive. Lots of tower dives, lots of early vision, lots of early invades, and kind of playing to that early game strength that they have and that aggressive style that Nintendo decks can really pull off. Lastly, I think the biggest strength coming in for Don't Queue Up Tomorrow is going to be their teamfight control. I think that the teamfight control that Don't Queue Up has is going to be extremely powerful in the late game. All of these players have experience. All of these players know their role. They know what they're supposed to do in the team fights. And so I want to see them use that to their advantage. I want to see them control the team fights and really push the direction that they want. We've talked a lot. This is good. On to the weaknesses. So Don't Queue Up Tomorrow, for the weaknesses, it's that mid game. It's kind of the polar opposite that you see from Sain. Because you have all of these players that are fantastic by themselves, getting them to mesh together, getting them to fit in a line and understand the role in the mid game is going to be extremely vital to their success. They have a lot to prove. I don't think that they have the ability to perform in the mid game just yet. That obviously is probably going to change once we come into the match and we actually see how they perform through scrims and blah, blah, blah. But that's going to be where I see them struggle the most. If they get behind in the early game and they're not going to be able to get the warding that they want and secure the rotations that they desire in the mid game, that's where you're going to see Don't Queue Up Tomorrow start to fall apart. Coordination could possibly cripple. Playing from behind, like I mentioned, is extremely terrible from any standpoint, especially when your team is extremely reliant on that early game becoming a possibility and really pushing you towards a victory. Finally, I think the biggest weakness for them is funneling their play style. And this is kind of a conditional weakness. I think that obviously if you get on your comfort champions, if you get in a composition that you know that you can perform on, it's definitely something that can kind of propel you towards, a positive gain towards the end of the match. But if the members of Sain can kind of funnel a specific play style that either Don't Queue Up Tomorrow is unfamiliar on or kind of plays into the strengths of Sain, I definitely see them pulling up a victory. So that's a little bit of what you get from Sain eSports, what you get from Don't Queue Up Tomorrow. My final thoughts, my final prediction, I really think that the mechanical skill of Don't Queue Up Tomorrow is actually going to pounce upon the team fighting prowess and the kind of control that Sain eSports brings to the table. I do, however, think that Sain is going to pull a game off. My final prediction is going to be 2-1 in favor of Don't Queue Up Tomorrow over Sain eSports, specifically because I feel that the coordination and the cross-map pressure that CCWin and the rest of his team can provide is going to be enough to catch Don't Queue Up Tomorrow off guard and potentially take a game off of them. Now, with that being said, I feel that with a team of the level of the potential capacity that Don't Queue Up Tomorrow has, I feel that once that one game gets taken off, they're not going to find any light. That's going to be their one game. Don't Queue Off is going to shrug off their shoulder. They're going to say, okay, cool, bruh. Now it's our turn. They're going to crank up the heat, and Sain eSports is going to fall to that pressure, and they're not going to really be able to handle it. So now we move on to our second best of two, or second best of three of the broadcast. Is going to be Supernova versus Underdog eSports White. Now, if you watched the pre-show, we didn't really touch upon either one of these two teams very much. I personally feel that both of these teams in Division B are kind of in the bottom half because you have a lot of extremely powerful organizations in that on that side of the roster. You look at Zenith Esports White or Zenith Esports. You look at Serpentis Esports White. And various others. And so I don't think that these guys are the top echelon. However, taking that and making it mutually exclusive of this match, I think that these two teams are fairly decent matched. Supernova, we'll go through them first, same way like we did the previous set. The roster is going to be Cavalry in the top lane, Jack Sparrow in the jungle. Filthy is actually going to be filling in the mid lane for this match. It's going to be Rainy. The name was backwards. It was confusing. Rainy at 80 carry and Grammy at support. So looking at some just kind of overarching themes that I see coming out of Supernova. Obviously, the big buzz is the gaming house that they have. It's from the clarification that I've got, it's not actually a gaming house where they're there the entire time. It's more like a boot camp. They're there for a couple months or a month. I don't know exactly how long, but they're there for an extended period of time. They all play together, they all learn together, and then they leave. So it's not something like the Team Liquid or Cloud9 gaming house where they're there 24/7 every single day of the week. With that being said, though, I do think that gaming house, boot camp, whatever you want to call it, is definitely beneficial to them. Obviously, when you can get your entire team in the same place and you can interact with each other, you can have those team bonding events, and you can just really create this escalated level of synergy. It definitely helps your team. To add on to that, Supernova has recruited some higher level players than what they had previously had in the other months. So having that recruitment, having that kind of extra level of talent in the same spot is definitely beneficial for your team. So that's kind of the biggest strength that I see. Communication and synergy definitely being at the forefront of their strengths. The other thing is the standard knowledge of each other and how they're going to perform. One of the biggest difficulties with the team and the not necessarily individual synergy that they have, but more or less team-oriented strategies, having yourself together and being able to know what the other is going to do before they do it really helps in a lot of your macro play. You think about the 2v1 situation, if you can prep your waves correctly and you can trust in your teammates that they're going to be able to rotate around the map and provide the adequate amount of vision, then you're going to find success. And that, for me, is the biggest set of strengths for Supernova, is going to be their synergy, is going to be their team fight power, and just their ability to push each other to the next limit with the constant form of communication that they're going to have. Now, flipping the script, going over onto the weaknesses side of things, I think that positioning, in the sense of, positioning across the board, I think is a big difficulty for Supernova. You take a look at a lot of their players, you look at Grammy, Filthy, and Jack Sparrow in some instances, they have a high amount of deaths. Granted, this is a lot coming from solo queue, so the competitive side of things I don't have as much knowledge of. I don't have those statistics available. So this piece of analysis is with a grain of salt, but looking at solo queue stats, looking at some of the custom fives that they have been known to be caught out of position. Grammy trying to go for some deep wards, ends up falling to the enemy. You look at Jack Sparrow being a little bit too aggressive in the jungle, ends up falling and giving away a couple deaths. That's going to be extremely unfortunate if they find themselves in that position up here against Underdog eSports White, because positioning, especially in a competitive tournament like this with so much on the line, you're going to have to make sure that every move you make is extremely safe and extremely cautious. Obviously, there is a sentence such as calculated aggression, but when it comes to warding, vision control, and just standard positioning, definitely something they're going to have to look out for. And then the second piece of this is the next step. So I've watched a couple of their games, I looked at a couple review tapes, and the biggest thing that I saw is their base is very good. For being in a gaming house, for taking a lot of people together, bringing them, the support staff that they have, it's great, but I feel that there's still a piece missing. I see potential in these players, I see opportunity, but there's just something that's stopping them from coming to the next step. I don't know if it's a piece in the support staff that they have that's just not pushing them to that level, if it's the mechanical skill of the players, but I feel that especially in a lot of their mid-game macro strategy, specifically on the rotations, once they're trying to get the inner turrets down, there's just some sort of discombobulation that I see to find, and that's what a lot of teams have really taken advantage of. It's you have, some members wanting to do one thing, some members wanting to do other, and while they do have an escalated level of communication, something that I've touched upon a lot in the past couple minutes, I do still think that there's something missing, and I'm probably going to get a little bit of a clearer sense on this in the broadcast, so look out for that as something that I bring up. But more importantly, I just want to see if they can bring it all together, pulling themselves into a complete game. So having a strong early game, being able to make the decision in the mid game, and then crushing the enemy and being able to get the neutral objectives in the late game. If they can do all that together, then they're definitely going to be a middle of the pack team that can potentially pull up some big upsets on the top level, on the top side of the team. So that's going to be the big thing for me for Supernova. Moving on to Underdog eSports White. The big thing for me, well, actually, let's go into the rosters first. So you see Super Frank in the top lane, Fanatilt in the jungle, Gunshin in the mid lane, Strong Dog at AD carry, Strong Dog, should I say, and Be Yourself at support. Overarching thing, biggest thing that I see for Underdog eSports White is kind of is an interesting concept, repetition. Obviously, repetition is kind of an obvious statement. You know, the more games you play together, the more synergistic you're going to be. Add in a gaming house for Supernova's sake, and you kind of, progress that a lot faster and, put it on an exponential curve. But for me, Underdog eSports White, I've followed them on social media. I've kind of watched their progression over the past couple months, and it's repetition after repetition. Every tournament that they get their hands on, they get involved. Every kind of land that they can pull themselves together into, they get involved. And that, for me, is extremely huge. And I wouldn't necessarily say it's a step above the gaming house strategy that Supernova has employed, but I definitely think it's on the same level, if not just barely above, because that repetition is so important. Yes, you can scrim all day. Yes, you can hang out with your teammates. But when you're actually grinding on these random one-off tournaments or these random lands or these just random situations to put your team in a competitive mindset, definitely going to be helpful. The second piece is the skill differential. Comparatively speaking, Underdog eSports White has a much higher level of players. You look at Filthy, who's mid-tier diamond, for Supernova, and then you look at the master tier diamond 1 tier players coming out of Underdog eSports White. So mechanically, they definitely have the advantage over Supernova in that regard. That mechanical differential is definitely going to fall into the strengths category for me. Because of that, and because of the repetition that they have, they will win team fights. And what I mean by that is, when you get in these clutch situations, when you get in these very calculated, all right, we're going to fight now kind of situations, and that essential go button gets pressed, Underdog eSports White has the ability to come out on top for that. I've seen it in the games that they've done previously. We watched them do it in certain instances during the preseason tournament, and they have that. They have that ability to succeed. They have that ability to have these very crisp, very clean team fights, and that's definitely going to work to their advantage. Another thing that they have to their advantage, which I think this is something that really any team can pull on if they have the right staff on board, and that's going to be Fanatilt and his aggressive style jungling. You think of what I mentioned in the first series with Major Danger and Sain eSports. You have a very aggressive style jungler in Fanatilt. He's been playing a lot of Graves, a lot of Nidalee, very counter jungle heavy, very high damage champions that succeed very heavily in the early game, and that is definitely a big plus for Underdog, because when you look at the consistency and the fluency that you have in Supernova, the best way to beat that is to throw off their vibe and to kind of get them in this chicken with their head cut off, what am I doing, where the hell am I going kind of thing. And that's what I see Underdog has up their sleeve with these Graves, Nidalee, or these other aggressive style junglers for Fanatilt. Now, flipping on to the weaknesses, I think that a big thing is, again, that double-edged sword with the early pressure. If those early game aggressive picks in the jungle don't work out, then that could be something that they really struggle from, and that's something that they're going to have to kind of figure out. And with that, I kind of fear for their ability to play from behind, because even though they have these crisp team fights, even though they have that repetition and that experience, it's really going to be up to them to pick their battles wisely. Because if they do decide to continue to be aggressive and they press the go button way too early, down 4, 5, 6, 10,000 gold, then that's where they're really going to struggle and put themselves in a disadvantageous position. Secondly, and this is kind of again, another conditional weakness to how they perform in this actual tournament, but there really isn't a lot of knowledge that I've been able to gain on their ability to perform in the mid game. Vision control, it's not something that I saw a lot of. I saw it in some instances, I didn't see it in some others, so there's a lot of inconsistency there. and just their mid-game rotations on trying to secure some dragon control, moving over to the Baron once it becomes a relevant neutral objective, and being able to take down cross-map turrets with the teleport advantage at their disposal. That's going to be the big telltale of whether or not they're going to be able to succeed in my book. I think if they can do that on a consistent basis in this series, then they're going to most definitely take the game over Supernova. But I just don't have enough knowledge to be able to gauge their success on that side. So that's kind of a conditional borderline for me. And then with that, though, again, kind of going back to the difficulty of playing from behind, is they're super reactive on the rotations when they are behind. You look at the 2v1 situations that they've put themselves in. When they get behind on the 2v1 and they go down that very early 2,000 gold before the 12 to 13 minute mark, they really seem to struggle because they know they're down. So mentally they're thinking, okay, we need to farm, we need to scale up, we need to wait till we hit our item spikes. But they just don't get there. They kind of go on tilt, and then that's when the game kind of gets lost on them. And so I want to see how they're going to be able to handle if they do get behind and if they kind of fall to this early game style that Supernova might decide to employ. So that's my analysis for Supernova. That's my analysis for Underdog eSports White. I've talked a lot about both teams. I do still feel, however, that Underdog, just based on their mechanical skill, something that you've seen as a consistency for this specific breakdown, I see Underdog actually pulling a 2-0 victory over Supernova. I think that Supernova still needs a couple extra things, a couple extra variables added to their formula before it becomes this super powerhouse style that the SN squad are trying to create. And so with that, I think that because of that extra fine tuning that they're going to need, Underdog eSports White is going to come in. They're going to do a fantastic job. They might struggle, but I think that based on the repetition that they've had as a unit, they're going to come out on top in the team fights. They're going to come out on top in the match. So that there was my Week 1 breakdown for the Initial Championship League. My name was Bill Jump Carter. Thank you guys so much for staying in. I know this was a longer video. I'll try to keep it a little bit more concise and maybe break down the points a little bit easier next time. This is something new that I'm trying to do, something that I feel is extremely important, not only for the ICL, but more importantly for the fans and the players that are getting involved in the ICL, because all of these players, all of these teams, all of these organizations deserve some kind of spotlight. And so trying to give you some sort of glimpse on their abilities, their strengths, their weaknesses, and kind of what I feel coming into the broadcast is definitely something that I want to be able to portray to you guys. So thank you guys so much for that. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button below. That way you can know every time I post something out. We are going to have our broadcast for the Initial Championship League Week 1 today at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. This is July 18th, for those of you wondering. We are going to also have Ram Brokenshard Jamal as our special guest analyst, former player of Dignitas, as well as a coach manager for Dream Team, the previous NACS team. So definitely going to be an exciting setup for that. We're also going to have Tyler Akiri Perron as our second analyst. He is the head coach for Flashpoint Esports. Should be able to give us a lot of good insight on these teams. With that, thank you guys. Have a good night. Jump out.